I just let one more person in, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to Grant Writing 101. I am Jess Hassler-Southwell, and here's a little bit about me. Graduated from Roberts Wesleyan. I'm coming to you live from Webster, New York. My dog is not here right now, but he is usually in the office. A little bit about me: Enneagram 3, INTJ, Pitta dosha, if you're into any of those personality types, creative problem solver, lifelong servant leader. And my background professionally is in the business development and project management space. I started consulting independently in 2019. So this presentation that I'm sharing tonight is one that I've done many times before. I am a teacher at the Rochester Brainery as well. I am the former executive director of Girls Rock Rochester, if any of you are familiar with that amazing organization. And I am currently the vice president of the board for GVCA. So excited to bring this content to our GVCA audience. And we'll throw a disclaimer in here, Caitlin, just so we have all the disclaimers. This presentation and attendance tonight is purely informational and educational, and of course, no guarantee of any kind of grant awards, nor do I have any influence or say in that process. So, but I'm really pleased to share sort of my experience as a grant applicant, and somebody who has reviewed lots of grants as well. So our agenda for tonight, I'm going to take you through finding grants. And again, this is, I haven't really customized this presentation for folks who are applying specifically to GVCA, for GVCA funding. So I do hope that the content tonight will help you find grants from a lot of different sources, and really help you build out some great resources for applying for funding from all over the place. So we're going to cover finding grants, building an application schedule. We're going to talk about eligibility criteria and what happens before you even submit an application. We'll talk about content and formatting. My favorite is the piece on building a content library. So I'm actually going to share with you my content library tool that I used to use at Girls Rock when I would apply for grants. And you're welcome to borrow that idea and use it for yourself. We'll talk about awards and rejections and reporting as well. So really like the full life cycle of grant funding. And we're very fortunate that we have Caitlin on with us. So if you have any specific questions about GVCA grants, she can answer those. All right, so let's talk about finding grants. I always recommend, because I'm a project manager and do a lot of strategic planning, that you block time regularly in your schedule to look for new funding opportunities. There are tried and true grant organizations out there like GVCA, but that there's always new grant funding becoming available. So I think it's great. When I was the executive director of Girls Rock, I would, on a quarterly basis, put an hour or two on my calendar to just search for new grants. I would also set up Google alerts. So if you're familiar with Google alerts, you can, set up alerts through Google using keywords. And you can ask Google to email you anything that matches those keywords on like a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So you can put things in there like, grants for artists, or, performance grants or things like that. You could set up alerts and get those, maybe on a weekly or monthly basis, so that new opportunities get fed right to you and you don't have to search for them. As you're cruising around the internet, interacting with different organizations, you can enroll in their mailing lists or subscribe to get email pushes to you. So I know that's something that you can do with GVCA, and most organizations these days have some kind of mailing list you can enroll in. So I always suggest you do that, because then that takes the burden off of you to seek and find these grants. You can also do some searches by geography. So it can be a little bit daunting to have like that, blank Google bar there, and you're like, God, what are my search terms? What am I asking for? So you could say, okay, federal grant database, or federal grants for arts and education, or something like that. And then you can search, of course, for state grants. City of Rochester has a lot of city grants. You can search regionally, Finger Lakes region, that sort of thing. And then there are like organization types. So there are foundations and councils, and also giving circles, especially in the Rochester area and parts of Monroe County. Giving circles are quite popular, where just groups of like-minded people, private citizens, will come together, pool their money, and make that grant funding available to folks around certain types of causes. And then you can also search by focus area. So here I've just listed out a few examples. I was always applying for grants for children and young people and marginalized youth and that sort of thing. So just a few suggestions there for how to do those searches. The Community Foundation, if you're not familiar with them, is a really great place to start. I should probably start by shouting out GVCA, but they're coming. I'll mention them next. But the Community Foundation is a great place to start. They have a fabulous website. Makes it very easy to search for grants by topic. And they have a mailing list, so you can subscribe. I actually just got an email from them this week about what grants are available right now and what the application deadlines are and everything. So that's really helpful. Are you sharing a PowerPoint? I am. Can you guys not see my PowerPoint?
I can.
You can or you can't?
You can.
I can.
You can. Okay. Karen, you can't? Oh no. It's a really great PowerPoint. Can you see any of us?
I can see all of you.
You can see us. Okay. Oh. Can you minimize us? Maybe we're in the way of the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Maybe. Let's see. Oh, there you go. Okay. Let me pull it.
Okay.
Let me put it on the other screen. Okay.
Our faces are lovely, but my PowerPoint's pretty cool too. Okay. So Community Foundation, they're a great resource. Next tip is to create a schedule. So this was sort of, when I started applying for lots of grants very regularly, I needed a place to organize which grants I was going to apply for, when the application deadlines were, what type of grants they were. So as you're out there finding grant opportunities, funding opportunities, I encourage you to capture information and organize information on what you're finding. Now, I'm a spreadsheet person, not everybody is, but you could certainly do this on paper. You could do it in a Word document. But I suggest you try to capture the key information on each of your grant opportunities. So get that information in some kind of format that makes sense to you. I really like Excel, because then what I would do is I would sort by application deadline. So once I did that, I would really sort of have my schedule for the year. And, I would know which grants I was applying for this month, this quarter, etc. And I would also add notes as I would send in applications, and keep track of, where I had submitted and hadn't submitted, and why. And then also it's great to capture any feedback. So after you've submitted a grant, any feedback, acceptance, awards, rejections, that sort of thing. Just helpful to have that historic information. So I'll show you what that looks like. So this was sort of the spreadsheet, where I would keep track of everything. So, here I'm showing who the granting organization is, the amount that I was asking for or that was available, what type of grant, and I would usually just copy and paste this from their website. I'd put the deadline in and any important notes about deadlines, and whether or not I submitted that year, because I was doing this sort of rinse and repeat, month over month, year over year. A link to where you apply, any contact information, and then any notes about that grant for that year. So that's how I was keeping track of these. I found it to be really helpful because it just sort of organized, my calendar and helped me plan my timelines. So before you apply, you certainly want to make sure you're eligible. Super important. So read the eligibility criteria carefully. Definitely don't hesitate to contact the organization if you have any questions about, do I meet the eligibility criteria? Does it make sense for me to apply for funding? And I would say, and Caitlin, you can probably attest to this, there's probably no such thing as a dumb question. And organizations typically prefer for you to ask questions and get clarification rather than just submit an application and waste your time and their time.
Yep.
Caitlin's nodding. And then you get to talk to wonderful people like Caitlin who are happy to answer your questions. Sometimes, and not everybody knows this, especially people who are newer to the grant application process, sometimes you need to register with an organization before you can submit an application. Sometimes you need to submit a letter of intent to apply in advance of applying. So I always like to throw those things out there because I don't want anybody to think, I can find a grant and just apply directly. Sometimes there are some, steps that you need to take in advance. And certainly research the organization that you're submitting to, right? Like, it's not good enough to find their website, find the grant application page, and whip up a grant to submit. You really want to understand who's offering the funding, where's the funding coming from, what's the purpose, because that's, sort of how you understand your audience and who you're submitting your application to. And you want to be speaking to that organization, not just sort of submitting a generic request for funding. I'll pause for just a second and ask if anybody has any questions. Okay, awesome. We shall proceed. So this is the fun part where you create your content to submit with your application. So on the left-hand side here, I just sort of have some examples of the types of information that are in a typical application package, including identification numbers, your contact information. Oftentimes I would need to include a list of my board members and, some profile information on those individuals, org history, mission vision, narrative, outcomes and success measures, budget, and financials. So that can be a lot of stuff. I think, depending on the type of grant that you're applying for, I intended for this to try to be sort of an all-inclusive list. There are some grants that you will apply for that are a little bit more simple and less fussy than this. So as you're creating your content, I always suggest creating an offline document outline. And this one, it looks funny in writing, so I'll explain it. Oftentimes, you'll run across organizations who have an online application form. So they have a digital form that's like built into their website where you just enter your application information in, which is lovely. But sometimes it's not smart enough to let you sort of save as you go. So you have like one shot to enter all the information in and click submit. And that always made me really nervous. Maybe it's because I'm like a type A person, but what I would do is I would recreate all those fields in a Word document. And then I would fill them in the Word document. And that gave me the opportunity to do it incrementally. Walk away, take a nap, have a glass of wine, whatever, come back to it, edit it, proofread. And then once I was happy with the content, I could then take it and copy and paste it into the digital form on the website. But it was just too nerve-wracking for me to try to do it all in one fell swoop and submit. So that's one thing I suggest. Don't leave any sections blank. So even if something's like not applicable, I would always put in not applicable, and sometimes even a reason why. just, so that I was clearly communicating to the organization why I didn't think I needed to answer a certain question or fill in a certain section. And then that gives them the opportunity to say, no, Jess, maybe you're not understanding what we're asking. This is the information we're asking you for. And then also it just sort of reinforces that you're not rushing through and skipping things or missing things. So don't leave anything blank. Double check for supporting documentation. So oftentimes I would need to submit grants and I'd have to attach a budget, attach last year's audited financial reports, and, just like sort of separate supporting documentation, maybe a letter of support from a community organization or something. So I would always double check that list and make sure I included everything that they were asking for. Obviously, you're going to communicate clearly using appropriate language. And the formatting thing, I always sort of recommend that you put yourself in the position of someone who's receiving your grant application, because, typically these organizations are getting lots and lots of requests for funding. So we have to sort of be empathetic for those folks who have to sit and review all of those. They could be volunteers, they could be staff members, but it's a lot of information to review. So definitely do your best to keep your application content organized and, chunk it up into nice paragraphs and sections with headings and that sort of thing, just to make it very clear and easy to read. You don't want to sort of do like a brain dump of stream of consciousness, word vomit onto a page for them to have to consume, if that makes sense. And always have somebody proofread. Your friend, your mom, send it to me. I'm happy to proofread your stuff, but always good to have a second set of eyes on things. All right, so next step, take a deep breath, because it looks like a lot of work. Every time I would apply to a grant or even just look at a grant opportunity, I would be like, oh my gosh, this is so much. This is going to take me forever. Why am I doing this? Why did I sign up for this? I don't even want this money anymore. Take a deep breath. It's very doable. So just get organized, organize your time, organize your content. And this is sort of the approach I would take from a time management standpoint. I would chunk it up into sort of these 7 steps. So if I was applying for a grant that was, 2 weeks from now, the deadline's 2 weeks away, then here I can say, okay, maybe every other day for an hour, I'm going to do one of these steps here. Then it feels a bit more manageable. So you're just going to take some time to review the opportunity and then maybe walk away, start to brainstorm, how what you're trying to accomplish fits in with that opportunity. Create that outline that we talked about, and then start to create some content. And you're going to do that in a couple rounds, right? Because you'll probably take an initial stab at it. And then if you're anything like me, you're going to, walk away or get up the next day and you're going to be blow drying your hair and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I should add this piece about, something compelling to really generate interest. So you'll go back and you'll beef up the content even more. Then take some time to make sure you've got all your supporting documents, if you need any. And then you'll sit down and review the whole thing from front to back and make sure it flows really nicely, make sure it looks good, it's easy to read, it's accessible. And then just do that one final review where you're, doing spelling, grammar check, all that good stuff. And then you're good to go. In that, when I frame it that way, does it seem a little bit more manageable?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Any questions? All right. So this is the fun part, building a content library. And this is really great if you intend to make it a practice to apply for funding from different sources, or maybe the same source year after year. So I would do this using Google Docs, but you could use Microsoft Word. This is definitely, this works best when you're operating digitally and not on paper. But start with your basics. So, you're going to have your identification numbers, your name, address, contact information, all the basics on you, your business, your organization. And then any previously used content, you can sort of pour into this content library document, or you can just start with this first application. So whatever application you're going to create after attending this class tonight, this can be how you start to build out your content library. And I'm going to share with you what that looks like on the next slide. So you'll see on the next slide how I use my headers to organize the content so that it's easily searchable in the digital format. And then you just keep adding content as you submit new applications. And that's what builds out your library. So this is what my document for Girls Rock looked like. And so you can see on the left-hand side, that's sort of my table of contents. And in Google Docs, as you probably know, you can click on those different sections and it'll skip to that section. So I've got all this content here from all the grants that I've applied to. I've also got like content from the organization's website, right? And so I know if I'm like writing a grant that's about, funding the camp program, for example, I can skip right to the camp program description. I can pull the content from there and copy and paste it into my new grant application. So this allows me to sort of cherry pick information that I already have, that I already wrote at one point, and use it to create a new grant application. Any questions about this? All right.
I just have a comment about
Yeah.
that. It's like, oh my gosh, we're not reinventing the wheel every time we do a grant application. And I'm sorry, that's a revelation for me.
No, that's really the intention, Karen. And, I would say, to piggyback off that, it's great because you're not reinventing the wheel, right? But I would find myself lifting content from this document, putting it in a new application, but maybe modifying it a little bit, depending on who my audience is, what the grant opportunity is, that sort of thing. So it's not
a framework.
Yes, absolutely. You have a great framework. And one of the nice things is, like, you can see one of my sections here is in camp outcomes. So, you've got some historical information there talking about outcomes. That's content that I actually lifted from reports that I had to submit for previous grants that we had been awarded. So just being able to keep track of and log outcomes all in one place, and then pull that into a new grant application to show history of positive outcomes is really valuable. Okay, so awards. This is the fun part. So you've been selected. Thank the organization, obviously. Thank the coordinator. When Caitlin sends you that email and says, we're sending you a big giant check, and I don't think we do big checks, do we, Caitlin? Oh, man, that's too bad, because big checks are fun, I feel like. But you're going to thank Caitlin, you're going to thank the organization or the panel, and you want to get permission to go public. So before you jump onto Facebook or run screaming down the street, you just want to say, can I share this yet? Or, is there going to be a date when the organization is going to announce this? And then you celebrate, open the wine, take a bubble bath, go get a massage, whatever, but give yourself time to feel the feels, because this stuff is a lot of work. And then save all of your files. So the application that you submitted, any supporting documentation, make sure you save it in a place that you'll remember, right? Because it may be a year or 2 years or 5 years until you have to report back to that organization about what you did. So when that time comes, you're going to want to be able to put your hands on that original application. So save all your stuff. Sometimes you'll get rejected. So again, you want to be gracious and say thank you, appreciate your consideration, because this is probably not the last time you will ask the organization for money, right? So you want to be very gracious about it. I always recommend asking for feedback. Caitlin, I think you do give feedback, right?
Yes, we do it through either a phone call or a meeting. So you just need to let me know that you would like to schedule that, and then we do it in person so there's no confusion over how things are taken over an email.
That's really awesome, because my experience as an applicant, when I would ask for feedback after a rejection, I would probably only get a response like half the time. It felt like a lot of times my request for feedback went into like some black hole, generic email box or whatever. And if anybody opened that email, they were like, lady, we don't have time to like give you any feedback. So great if you get feedback. If you do get feedback, definitely record that. I would record that in that grant tracking spreadsheet so that the next time you go back to ask for funding from that same organization, you remember like what happened last time, what was actionable in that feedback that can inform my next application. And then follow through public channels who was awarded. So, when you're rejected, they're not like, the organization's not likely to say, sorry, you didn't get the grant, but Susan got the grant. That's probably not going to happen. But, like they're going to announce eventually who was funded. So just sort of keep track of that. Because, that's valuable information. Is the person who was funded very dissimilar to the project you're working on or your organization, and make note of that. So yes, grant coordinators should be available to provide feedback. That's Caitlin. And then just like another sort of important note is not to reach out to board members or try to figure out who's on the application panel or solicit feedback through any sort of back channels. Like, you don't want to do that. It's not a good look. It's not appropriate. And those people probably don't know and don't have useful information for you. So definitely go through the proper channels. And in this case, that's Caitlin. Vanessa's saying minimal feedback. Yes, I agree with you, Vanessa. It's really frustrating when you don't get good feedback. But we persist, right? We continue submitting the applications. All right. So provide appropriate reports. So have the original application ready, like I mentioned, like after you're done submitting the application and everything that goes with it, save it in a place that you can easily access when it comes time to do your report. Use the granting organization's report format. So sometimes they will provide you with a specific format for this is what you need to fill out, a year from today or at the completion of your project or whatever. If they don't provide a form, then what I would do is I would create a report that sort of aligned with my narrative. So, if they asked for sort of, the mission statement of the organization and the project description and what the outcomes would be, then my report back to them at the end of the cycle would be similar. So I would again, restate our organization, what we did, what our purpose was, what the project was. And sometimes, the project that you thought you were going to complete turns out a little bit different than what you actually execute. So, spell that out in the report, and then the outcomes. And that could be the outcomes that you intended versus your actual outcomes, or it could just be your actual outcomes. But, I would try to mirror something very similar, because chances are the people who are reviewing your report are doing it side by side with your application to say, okay, this is what they said they were going to do with the money. Is this what they did with the money? And this is a snippet I just wanted to use as an example, but I think this is outdated, Caitlin. So don't take this to be the current reporting guideline for GBCA. This is just for the purposes of an example. All right. So the intent with the report back to your funding organization is to prove that you used the money wisely and you did what you promised you were going to do in the application. But sometimes we have to pivot. So I received grant funding for Girls Rock pre-pandemic. And then, that was supposed to fund a program that landed smack in the beginning of the pandemic when we all went into lockdown. So our summer camp didn't happen. And we had tens of thousands of dollars to run the summer camp and fund all these scholarships for kids to attend and purchase instruments for them and all kinds of awesome stuff. Now, I certainly didn't want to give the money back. We still used the money. So we had to pivot, but we were able to prove similar outcomes. So instead of having an in-person camp experience for our campers, we were actually able to do a whole virtual camp for the same period of time, for the same number of campers who needed scholarships. And instead of using the funding, to purchase instruments and all kinds of other things and feed the kids and this, that, and the other, we were able to supply them with iPads and hotspots so they could have internet access so that they could attend the virtual camp. So still used the money, still achieved the same purpose, but the money was used a little bit differently than we had originally outlined. Also, in your report, you're going to want to include any metrics. Data is always super powerful. So if you can talk about the number of people who attended a performance, or just like the number of lives that you're touching, the number of people you're engaging with, that sort of thing. I think that's really powerful. Things that we can measure. And then once you create this report, you're going to want to pull this content out and put it in your library or your compendium so that you have it for later. So that outcomes stuff, the next time you apply for a grant, you're going to want to be able to say, oh my God, look at what an awesome job I did the last time you gave me money, or when these people over here gave me money. I did some really cool stuff and I touched, dozens of people's lives in my community. So give me more money. All right. And that's that. I'm like ahead of schedule tonight, way ahead of schedule. So we've got lots of time to chat. If anybody has any questions for me or questions for Caitlin.
Yeah.
So did you have to ask permission to pivot, or you just need to make sure that you comply to the best that you can?
The latter, Karen. So I did not ask permission to pivot. But I will say I was prepared if they were unhappy with our pivot to give the money back. Mm-hmm. So that was a discussion that we, sort of had to have with our board of directors, right? Like, okay, we still want camp to happen. I think it would have been a lot of rigmarole to go through with the granting organization to try to figure out, so we sort of decided rather beg for forgiveness than ask permission on that one.
Yep.
And I'll pipe in, this past year, GBCA asked for an overview of what the attempt was going to be changing, because for many groups, it was like they were supposed to do a show in a certain venue that was completely shut down, and most of the venues in Rochester were. So what is your plan to pivot? How are you going to change the funds? Many groups were able to switch to something virtual, but there were some that had to completely pivot. For example, we had one group that was supposed to do The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe at Muck. Muck was closed until 2 months ago. So they went, and they didn't have streaming rights. The playwrights didn't allow them to do Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe virtually. So they did an open rehearsal. My roommate's coming home, so just a heads up with that. An open rehearsal, and they did a talk back and showed a series of videos about how they were designing the set and the makeup and the lighting. So they were still showing different aspects of the show that was going on. They were still able to use the funds ahead of time for the production, and they have applied or are planning to apply for funding to do the show for real this spring.
Awesome. Any other questions? I'll mention, I'll send Caitlin a copy of this PowerPoint, if anybody wants a copy to have. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
So I'm full of questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, we got lots of time, Karen. I'm here for it.
So what do you think of services, subscription services like Grant Station, or those that, collect the grants for you in one-stop shopping? Do you feel that they're worth the subscription money?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I never enrolled or subscribed to any of those services. But I guess it depends, right? It depends on, I guess if I were to advise you one way or another, I would say if you're going to do that, you definitely want to measure your return on investment. So, is that positioning you to get more funding, or are you better off just investing time on your own, sort of identifying the grant opportunities that speak to you? I mean, as the executive director of Girls Rock, I was fortunate in that it was part of my job description. So technically I was getting paid to research and find grants and all of that. Not everyone is in that position.
Yeah, time is a precious commodity, It's
Sure.
from a Rotary Club, so it's where I can squeeze in a few minutes here and there,
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
okay.
For
Thanks.
sure. Yeah, I might start, Karen, with I really do think Google Alerts worked well for me, because that's one way to have stuff pushed to you so you're not hunting. And you can just try all different kinds of combinations of keywords out there. So I had good luck with that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Just have a couple of comments.
Yeah.
Having been in the grant business for more than 40 years, and I did not know of your organization. It came up on my Facebook feed, and I thought, well, I'll sit in and see if anything's changed. You did a great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Hit all the key points. Just want to mention a couple of things. Make sure your grants aligned with the goals of your organization and those of the funding source, which takes time to research. So the research part of it that you mentioned, Jess, is really, really important.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Janice. It can be super tempting to find a grant opportunity and just, start that application, like I said, and submit. But you're going to have such better luck if you take the time to really understand who you're sending an application to, and understand who your audience is. And you want to make sure that, that whoever you're applying for funds from has shared values with you or the organization you're applying for, right? For example, when I was applying for grants for Girls Rock Rochester, I would be careful about, who I was applying for funding from. I'm not going to go to the Republican, National Convention and ask for money for LGBTQ youth programming, typically, just because maybe our values aren't in alignment. So that's really important for a lot of reasons, but especially the ones you mentioned, Janice.
The only other comment I wanted to make is, again, being aware of your funding source. When you are reporting your outcomes, make sure that you are giving them what you said you were spending the money on. The feds especially, they're very picky about changing the direction of your program midstream. They don't like that. but they also don't like to take their money back. So keep in touch with your program director. And if you are having to make a change for any reason, run it by them first and get it in writing.
Yeah, I will say, working with GVCI we're so fortunate to be able to have somebody like Caitlin on staff who can be accessible to folks who are applying for funding, for questions, problems, feedback, like all of those things, because, like Vanessa and I attested to, sometimes it's just radio silence. And sometimes it really does feel like, you're sending your application to a robot processor, and then you might get a nice check in the mail, but there may not be that human interaction piece. So it's really great to work with an organization like this, where you have a human person who will take time out of their day to sit down with you one-on-one.
I'm going to bow out now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
for
Jenna.
letting me sit in.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Thanks so much.
See,
I
Diane
have a
had a hand up.
question.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, I'm very, very new to this. I started this year trying to do grants. Are there any grants out there for nonprofits who do not have a specific project that they're doing? Because most of the ones I run into, you need to have some sort of project that you're trying to attain. And I'm
Yeah.
finding it very hard to find a grant for our group.
Yeah, so what you're looking for are funds just to cover operating expenses, right, Diane? Like just
Yes.
general operating funds. And there are those grants out there. And I have applied to some in the past for Girls Rock. The Community Foundation that I mentioned earlier is a really great resource. And the Community Foundation really pulls together a lot of different funding sources in our community. So some of those giving circles that I mentioned would be a really great place to look for funding, Diane. And the giving circles, in my experience, are a little bit less formal in the application process. So sometimes they are just looking for something as simple as a letter that describes the organization and what you're trying to do and what you need money for. And it doesn't have to be project specific. So check out the Community Foundation, Diane, but there are definitely those opportunities out there. And one of, as you're out there searching, use those keywords like general operating funds, that sort of thing. Then hopefully that'll weed out some of the more project specific grants.
Okay, because I think we're kind of running out of fundraising ideas and we're like, we have to get money somehow.
Yeah. What's your organization, Diane? Do you want to tell us?
Oh, I'm with the Liberty Bells, and we do a lot of performances at retirement homes or township community events, things of that nature. So we don't necessarily have a project base, but we do need costumes and pay for the rent where we practice at. Just things to, some transportation, things to operate. And I'm just finding that if we don't have a project like, build risers, then it's very hard to find a grant for that.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel you there.
Yeah, but that helps. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Maybe you don't have a question. Maybe you have some experience you want to share with us.
I'm gonna say, V said she's gonna be typing a question in the chat. So if anybody is unable to unmute themselves right now but needs to type stuff in the chat, feel free to do that, and we can read that out for you.
Yeah.
And also, if you don't want to say the question out loud as you yourself, you can also direct it at me, and I can read it for you and keep it anonymous as well. It's like an anonymity.
Thank you all. This was very informative, and I'll sign off.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Have a nice evening.
Cheers.
Okay, so the question from V is, I apply as an individual artist and I often am looking for funds to aid in the production of a piece. My biggest issue as a younger artist who is not only new to the area but also new to being on the scene, as I spent time raising my children before returning to the arts. What avenues would you employ to find platforms/venues for showing your work and interacting with the public as an independent? I know you are more speaking from this as an organization aspect.
Yeah. Ooh, this is a good question, B. So I'm just sort of reading between the lines a little bit. I don't know if you're feeling like being a younger artist is a disadvantage compared to being a more established artist. I would say first, use that to your advantage, and make that part of your story when you ask for funding. You're a younger artist and you're new to the area, but you're bringing something to the scene, right? Our scene didn't have you before, so you bring something unique that you can then describe to tell that story and make a compelling request for funding. So let's see, what avenues would you employ to find platforms or venues for showing your work and interacting with the public? So this sounds like less of a funding question to me, V, than just like, how do I get myself out there and get exposure and that sort of thing? So I would definitely, I've got all kinds of suggestions. First, definitely organizations like GVCA, right? If you're not already a member, become a member. As a member, you can be part of our member shows. So we have shows annually where our members get to exhibit their work and get it in front of hundreds of folks who come through our galleries. So I would say definitely become a member of GVCA, but also organizations like us. And we're so fortunate in the greater Rochester area. There are so many things going on in the arts scene. So I don't know, what your medium is, V, or what you're creating, but I would look for organizations in our community that align with the type of work that you're doing, and find out if you can become a member. So many places, ROCO, places, places at the Hungerford. We have an office at the Hungerford now, but there's all kinds of opportunities to showcase your stuff. So I would say get plugged into those networks if you aren't already. There's, oh goodness. There's opportunities at the Rochester Public Market, all kinds of stuff. There are other arts councils, in other parts of our region. I don't know where you're located, V, but Wyoming County has an arts scene and a great arts council. Anybody who's with us tonight? I mean, we've got lots of experienced folks on the call too. Does anybody else have suggestions for V to get exposure?
V said, so I moved here in August 2019, directly before the pandemic, and have been very remote until now. So I'm only just starting to foster those connections. So any suggestion would help. And what is ROCO? And ROCO is Rochester Artist Collective, or is that, no, that's RAC. That's RAC Week.
No, that's RAC. ROCO is the Contemporary Arts Gallery, ROCO.
Yes.
And
I will add, just because I've spoken with V, she works in animation and film and that sort of thing.
Cool. All right. That's awesome. In animation and film too, I would keep an eye on what's happening at like the Eastman House. They have really cool stuff going on there. They have cool events. Even just attending, those events and sort of networking, getting to know the people there. That could be very interesting.
I would say that the colleges in the region too, attending the gallery shows and the, performances and things like that. It's a very vibrant arts community. Even if you just take the college stuff out of it, excerpt it out.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Are you in Rochester, V, or where are you? V, you're in Rochester. Caitlin's nodding. I'm like, there are so many Oh, you teach RIT. All right, fabulous. You teach RIT. So you're plugged into the academic scene. That's fantastic. Cool stuff happens at the Little Theater too. You know, let's see, I'm trying to think what else in like animation and that type of thing. There are so many opportunities. The Yards, is it the Yards Collective? I think it's called, Caitlin.
Yards Artist Collective.
Artist Collective. So that's another one to check out. That's just, that's at the public market. And they do a lot of community stuff. So yeah, I'm trying to think of what else. It feels like there's so many different like pop-ups and different kinds of things happening in Rochester. Of course, festival season is winding down, but any other questions or tips or tricks anybody wants to share? All right, awesome. Well, like I said, I'll share my slide deck with Caitlin, who can then email it to anybody who would like a copy. You are welcome to reach out to me with any questions. My website is approachconsultingllc.com. So you can find me on social media, Approach Consulting. And, Caitlin has all my contact information as well. So I'm always happy to help. I'm always happy to proofread your stuff, give you feedback on applications. Yeah, thanks so much for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And I wish everyone lots of luck, and I hope big checks are in your future.
Thank you, Jess. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you, guys. That was great.
You're welcome. Everybody have a nice evening. Thanks for hosting,
Thank
Caitlin.
you.
Yes, thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.